They say a mother's love is unconditional, but nobody warns you about the moment your own son looks you in the eye and tells you you're no longer his mother. I'm 71 years old now, and I've survived poverty, widowhood, cancer, and more heartbreak than most people see in 3 lifetimes. But nothing, and I mean nothing prepared me for the day my boy chose his pride over my dignity. If you've ever been cast aside by someone you'd die for, then you know exactly what I'm about to tell you. And if you're watching this from wherever you are in the world, Chicago, Lagos, Mumbai, I don't care. Leave a comment and let me know, because I want to hear your stories too. Check the description box below, because there are more stories like mine waiting for you there, stories about women who refuse to be erased. My name is Eleanor Pritchard, and this is the story of how I lost my son, found my voice, and made sure that everyone in that room, everyone understood why women like me never bow to arrogance. I grew up in a shotgun house in rural Alabama, the kind of place where you could hear your neighbors' arguments through paper-thin walls and smell their Sunday pot roast from your front porch. My mother was a seamstress, my father a factory worker who drank his paycheck every Friday and came home with fists that spoke louder than words. I learned early that survival meant silence. You kept your head down, you made yourself small, and you never, ever talked back. I was 17 when I met Harold Pritchard at a church social. He was 23, broad-shouldered, with a smile that made me feel like I was the only girl in the room. He worked at the mill, made decent money, and told me I was pretty every single day. We got married 6 months later in a ceremony so small you could count the guests on 2 hands. I wore my mother's wedding dress, altered to fit my frame, and I believed, that I was starting a new life. Harold wasn't a bad man. He wasn't cruel like my father. But he was absent. Emotionally, I mean. He worked long hours, came home tired, ate dinner in front of the television, and fell asleep in his recliner by 8 o'clock. We had 2 children, my daughter, Louisa, and 3 years later, my son, Jeffrey. I poured everything I had into those kids. I read to them every night, made their Halloween costumes by hand, attended every parent-teacher conference and every school play. I was the mother I wished I'd had. But here's the thing about giving everything. You forget to save anything for yourself. When Jeffrey was 12 and Louisa was 15, Harold died. Heart attack. Sudden. He collapsed in the mill parking lot on a Tuesday morning, and by the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. I remember standing in the hospital hallway, staring at the white linoleum floor, thinking, I don't even know how to feel right now. We hadn't been unhappy, but we hadn't been happy either. We'd just existed. And now he was gone, and I was 38 years old with 2 kids and a mortgage I couldn't afford. I took a job at the county clerk's office. It didn't pay much, but it was stable, and I was good at it. I typed fast, filed everything perfectly, and never missed a day. I worked my way up from receptionist to senior clerk to, eventually, office manager. I put Louisa through nursing school and Jeffrey through a community college business program. I didn't remarry. Didn't even date. I told myself I didn't have time, but the truth is, I didn't trust myself to choose well. I'd already chosen a man who'd made me feel invisible. I wasn't about to do it again. By the time Jeffrey graduated and got his first real job at a logistics company, I was 55 and exhausted. But I was also proud. I'd done it. I'd raised 2 good kids on my own, kept a roof over our heads, and never asked anyone for a dime. I thought that was enough. I thought my job was done. I was wrong. Jeffrey met Amanda Crowley when he was 26. She worked in HR at the same company, and according to him, she was smart, ambitious, and beautiful. I met her for the first time at a Sunday dinner I'd prepared at my house. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, the works. She walked in wearing a crisp white blouse and designer jeans, her blonde hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, and she shook my hand like we were closing a business deal. "Mrs. Pritchard," she said, smiling with perfect teeth. "Jeffrey's told me so much about you." "Call me Eleanor," I said, trying to match her energy. "And I hope he's told you I make the best pot roast in 3 counties. She laughed, but it was polite. Controlled. She sat at my table, complimented the food, and asked me questions about my job, my hobbies, my life. But the whole time, I felt like I was being assessed. Like she was checking boxes on some invisible list. Still, I told myself I was being paranoid. Jeffrey was happy. That was all that mattered. They got engaged 8 months later. I cried when he told me, Happy tears, I thought. But looking back, I think part of me already knew. I already sensed that I was losing him. The wedding was big. Too big for my taste, but Amanda's father, Gerald Crowley, insisted on paying for everything, and Amanda wanted what she called a proper celebration. Gerald owned a successful construction company, the kind of business that had weathered recessions and still came out on top. He was in his early 60s, tall and broad-chested, with silver hair that he wore slicked back and a voice that filled every room he entered. He was the kind of man who believed his money made him wise, his success made him untouchable, and his opinions were facts. At the rehearsal dinner, Gerald stood up to give a toast. He talked about his daughter, about Jeffrey, about the importance of family and hard work. Then he looked at me. And of course, he said, his voice dripping with condescension, we have to thank Eleanor for raising such a fine young man, even though she had to do it alone. I'm sure that wasn't easy. The table went quiet. I felt every eye on me. My cheeks burned. It wasn't, I said calmly, forcing a smile. But I managed just fine. Gerald laughed. Well, thank God Jeffrey found Amanda. Now he's got a real family to rely on. If I could describe that moment, it would be the sound of glass shattering inside my chest. I glanced at Jeffrey, waiting for him to say something, to defend me, to tell Gerald that I was his real family. But Jeffrey just looked down at his plate and said nothing. Louisa, sitting beside me, reached under the table and squeezed my hand. That was the only comfort I got. After the wedding, things changed. Jeffrey and Amanda moved into a house that Gerald had helped them buy, a 4-bedroom colonial in a gated community. I was invited over once a month, maybe, always for stiff, formal dinners where Amanda controlled the conversation and Gerald dominated it. I started to feel like a guest in my own son's life. But I told myself it was normal. Newlyweds needed space. Jeffrey was building his own family now. I should be happy for him. I tried. God, I tried. And if you've ever felt like you're losing someone you love, not because they're gone, but because they're choosing someone else over you, then you know how lonely that is. Maybe you're feeling it right now. Maybe that's why you're here, watching this, looking for answers. I don't have all of them, but I can tell you this, it gets worse before it gets better. So if you're still with me, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, because there's a lot more to this story, and I promise you, it's going to take you places you didn't expect. Check the description box for even more stories like this one. You won't regret it. 2 years into Jeffrey and Amanda's marriage, I started noticing the distance more sharply. Phone calls became shorter. Invitations became rarer. When I did visit, Amanda was always busy. On a work call, organizing something for the house, coordinating with her father about a new business venture Jeffrey was involved in. Gerald was funding Jeffrey's dream of starting his own logistics consulting firm, and suddenly my son was spending more time with his father-in-law than he'd ever spent with his own father. I was proud of Jeffrey's ambition, don't get me wrong. But I also saw how he was changing. He started dressing differently, expensive suits, designer watches, shoes that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. He talked differently too, using corporate jargon and speaking in this clipped, confident tone that sounded like Gerald's voice coming out of his mouth. One afternoon, I called him just to check in. I hadn't heard from him in 3 weeks. Hey, sweetheart, I said when he picked up. How are you? Busy, Mom, he said, distracted. I could hear papers rustling in the background. What's up? Nothing. I just wanted to hear your voice. There was a pause. Okay. Well, I'm in the middle of something, so. Jeffrey, I haven't seen you in over a month. Another pause. Longer this time. I know. Things have just been crazy with the business. Gerald's been mentoring me, and. Gerald, I repeated, trying to keep my voice even. You've been spending a lot of time with him. Yeah, well, he's teaching me a lot. He knows how to build something that lasts, Mom. He's successful. The implication hung in the air. Unlike your father. Unlike you. I'm glad you're learning, I said quietly. But don't forget where you came from, Jeff. What's that supposed to mean? It means I worked 3 jobs to put you through school. I went without so you could have. And I don't want you to forget that. He sighed, and I could hear the irritation in it. Mom, I haven't forgotten. But I'm trying to build something here, and I don't need guilt trips right now. I'm not. I have to go. I'll talk to you later. He hung up before I could respond. I sat there in my kitchen, staring at the phone in my hand, and I felt something crack open inside me. It wasn't anger yet. It was something worse. It was the realization that my son saw me as a burden. Louisa visited me the next weekend. She lived 2 hours away with her husband, Daniel, and their 2 kids, but she made time to drive over when she sensed something was wrong. She always did. Jeffrey's being a jackass, she said bluntly over coffee at my kitchen table. He's just focused, I said, even though I didn't believe it. He's being a jackass, she repeated. Mom, you don't have to defend him. I'm not defending him. I'm just saying he's got a lot on his plate. And whose fault is that? Louisa leaned forward, her eyes sharp. Gerald's been in his ear for 2 years, telling him he's better than where he came from. Amanda doesn't help either. She's always talking about elevating their lifestyle, whatever that means. They're turning him into someone else. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. She was right. What am I supposed to do? I asked quietly. Stop making excuses for him, Louisa said. And stop letting them treat you like you don't matter. But how do you do that when the person treating you that way is your own child? It was a Saturday in late September when Jeffrey called and invited me to dinner at his house. Not just me, Louisa and Daniel too. He said Amanda was planning something special, a family gathering. I should have known better. I should have felt the warning signs. But I was so starved for his attention that I said yes immediately. I brought a homemade peach cobbler, the kind Jeffrey used to beg me to make when he was a kid. Louisa drove me, and we arrived together just after 6. The house was immaculate, as always. Everything gleamed, marble countertops, polished wood floors, fresh flowers in crystal vases. It looked like a magazine spread, not a home. Gerald and his wife, Diane, were already there. Diane was a quiet woman, pleasant enough, but she lived in Gerald's shadow. She smiled at me when I walked in, but it was a smile that said I'm sorry for what's about to happen. Amanda greeted us at the door, her smile tight. Eleanor, Louisa, Daniel, so glad you could make it. We sat down to dinner, roasted chicken, asparagus, some kind of quinoa salad that I didn't recognize. Gerald held court, as usual, telling stories about his latest business deal, about the city council meeting he dominated, about how Jeffrey was learning so much under his guidance. Jeffrey's got real potential, Gerald said, pointing his fork at my son. But potential only matters if you've got the right people around you. You surround yourself with winners, you become a winner. I felt the implication like a slap. I stayed quiet, pushing food around my plate. Then Gerald turned to me. Eleanor, he said, his voice loud and jovial. I've been meaning to ask, what exactly is it you do again? Jeffrey mentioned you work at a clerk's office. County clerk, I said. I'm the office manager. Office manager, Gerald repeated, nodding slowly, like he was considering it. That's nice. Stable. Not particularly ambitious, but stable. The table went silent. Dad, Amanda started, but Gerald waved her off. I'm just saying, there's a difference between stability and success. Some people are content just getting by, and that's fine. But others, he looked at Jeffrey, others want more. My hands were shaking under the table. Louisa's eyes were on fire. Actually, Gerald, I said, my voice calm but firm, I worked 3 jobs after my husband died to put 2 kids through college. I didn't have a trust fund or a construction company to fall back on. I had my hands and my will. And I'm proud of what I built. Gerald smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course you are. I didn't mean to offend. I just think it's important to acknowledge that some people have had advantages. Like you? I asked. His smile faltered. Advantages like inheriting your father's business? Like having capital to start with? Because I had none of that, Gerald. I started with nothing. And I still raised a son who's sitting at this table because of me. The room was suffocating. Gerald set down his fork. You've got quite the mouth on you, Eleanor. I've got a spine, I said. Maybe you're not used to that. Jeffrey stood up abruptly. Mom, can I talk to you outside? I knew what was coming, but I followed him anyway. And if you think you know where this is going, trust me, you don't. Because what happened next was the moment everything shattered. So stay with me. And while you're here, if this story is hitting you anywhere near as hard as it hit me to live it, go ahead and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Check the description box for more stories that'll make you feel seen. Because we're just getting started. Jeffrey didn't speak until we were standing in his driveway, far enough from the house that no one could hear us through the windows. The evening air was cool, but I felt hot all over, my pulse hammering in my ears. He stood there with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, and for a moment, I didn't recognize him. This wasn't the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. This wasn't the young man who'd cried on my shoulder when his father died. This was someone else. What the hell was that? He said, his voice low and sharp. What, Jeffrey? I asked, folding my arms to mirror his. Me standing up for myself. You embarrassed me, he snapped. You embarrassed Amanda. You disrespected Gerald in his own son-in-law's home. I stared at him. He insulted me. He insulted everything I've done for you. He was making conversation. He was belittling me, I shot back. And you sat there and let him. Jeffrey shook his head, pacing a few steps away before turning back to me. You don't get it, Mom. Gerald is helping us. He's funding my business. He's opened doors for me that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And you just had to go and make it about you. Make it about me. My voice rose despite myself. Jeffrey, I wasn't the one who brought up my job. I wasn't the one who implied that I'm somehow less than because I didn't inherit a company. Gerald did that. And I defended myself. You were rude. I was *honest. You were out of line, he yelled, and I flinched. He saw it and softened his voice slightly, but the anger was still there, simmering. Look, I need you to go back in there and apologize to Gerald. I laughed, a bitter, disbelieving sound. Apologize? For what? For disrespecting him. For making tonight uncomfortable. Just apologize, and we can move past this. No. His eyes went cold. What? I said no, Jeffrey. I'm not apologizing to that man. He owes me an apology. Jeffrey took a step closer, and his voice dropped to something dangerous. Mom, I'm asking you nicely. Go back in there and apologize. And I'm telling you, I won't. We stood there, locked in a silent standoff, the weight of every unspoken resentment between us pressing down like a storm cloud. Then Jeffrey said the words that would carve a canyon between us. If you don't apologize, he said slowly, his eyes hard, then you stop being my mother. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. What did you just say? I whispered. You heard me, he said, his voice flat. Apologize, or you're done. I mean it. You walk away from this, and you walk away from me. From Amanda. From any future grandkids. All of it. The world narrowed to his face, to the cold certainty in his eyes. This was my son. My baby. The boy I'd rocked to sleep, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for. And he was disowning me. For a moment, I thought about caving. I thought about swallowing my pride, walking back into that house, and saying whatever Gerald wanted to hear. I thought about how easy it would be to just bend, just this once, to keep my son. But then I thought about every moment I'd made myself small. Every time I'd stayed silent when my father hit my mother. Every time I'd nodded along when Harold ignored me. Every time I'd let someone else define my worth. And I realized, if I apologized now, I'd be telling myself that I didn't matter. That my dignity was worth less than Gerald Crowley's ego. That my son's love was conditional on my obedience. I couldn't do it. I looked Jeffrey in the eye, and I said, okay. He blinked, clearly not expecting that. Okay what? Okay, I agree, I said, my voice steady now. I'll go to your house. I'll stand in front of Gerald, and I'll say something. But I'm not apologizing. Mom. I'm not apologizing, I repeated. But I'll say something. And when I'm done, you'll understand exactly why women like me don't bow to arrogance. Jeffrey's face darkened. Don't do this. You already did it, sweetheart, I said quietly. You gave me an ultimatum. So here's mine. I'll go back in there, and I'll speak my piece. But after that, if you still want me gone, then I'm gone. And you'll have to live with that choice for the rest of your life. I turned and walked back toward the house before he could respond. My legs were shaking, but I kept moving. Louisa met me at the door, her face pale. "Mom, what's happening?" "I'm about to make a point," I said. "And I need you to trust me." She searched my face, then nodded. "Okay." I walked back into the dining room. Everyone looked up: Amanda, Gerald, Diane, Daniel. Jeffrey came in behind me, his face a mask of anger and something else. Fear, maybe. I stood at the head of the table and looked directly at Gerald. "Gerald," I said, my voice clear and calm, "my son seems to think I owe you an apology. So here's what I have to say." The room held its breath. "And if you think you know what I said next, I promise, you don't. Because what came out of my mouth wasn't an apology, it was a reckoning. So don't you dare click away now. This is the moment everything changes. And if this story is gripping you even half as much as it gripped that room, then share it. Comment where you're from. Check the description box for more stories like this, because you need to see how this ends." Gerald Crowley sat there, his silver hair catching the light from the chandelier above, his hands folded on the table like a king holding court. His wife, Diane, looked down at her lap. Amanda's face was frozen, somewhere between horror and curiosity. Jeffrey stood behind me, and I could feel the heat of his anger radiating like a furnace. But I didn't care. Not anymore. "Gerald," I said again, holding his gaze, "my son believes I should apologize to you for speaking honestly at your table. So I want to make sure we're all clear about what happened here tonight. You insulted my life's work. You implied that I am less than because I didn't inherit wealth or have the privilege of starting with a safety net. You dismissed everything I sacrificed, 3 jobs, sleepless nights, years of going without, so that my children could have a chance at something better. And when I defended myself, when I refused to sit quietly and accept your condescension, my own son told me I was out of line." Gerald's mouth tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "Good. Because I wasn't done. I came to this country with nothing but my hands and my will," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "I was raised in a house where my father's fists spoke louder than his words, and my mother's silence was her only defense. I married young to escape that, and I ended up with a man who loved me in his way, but who made me feel invisible. When he died, I had 2 kids, a mountain of debt, and no one to rely on but myself. So I worked. I worked until my hands ached and my eyes burned and I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept through the night. I gave everything I had so my kids could have more than I did." I looked at Jeffrey now, and my voice cracked just slightly. "And I thought that was enough. I thought that love and sacrifice would be enough. But apparently, it's not. Apparently, unless you have money, unless you have power, unless you can fund someone's dreams and open doors with your checkbook, your love doesn't count." "Mom, that's not," Jeffrey started, but I held up a hand. "Let me finish," I said. "Because this is important. Gerald, you asked me what I do. I'll tell you. I manage an office where people come when they're lost, when they need documents to prove who they are, when they're trying to build a life or fix a mistake or start over. I help them. I see them. I treat them with dignity, no matter who they are or where they came from. That's what I do. And maybe that doesn't sound impressive to you. Maybe it doesn't come with a corner office or a mansion or a seat at the country club. But it matters." Gerald shifted in his seat. His face was still hard, but there was something else there now. Discomfort, maybe. Or shame. "I don't need your approval," I said quietly. "I don't need your validation. I know what I'm worth. But what breaks my heart, what destroys me, is that my son doesn't. He's spent so much time in your shadow, learning your values, absorbing your belief that worth is measured in dollars and status, that he's forgotten where he came from. He's forgotten the woman who gave him everything so he could be standing here today." I turned to Jeffrey, and my voice softened. "I love you, Jeffrey. I always will. But I won't apologize for standing up for myself. I won't bow to arrogance. I won't make myself small so someone else can feel big. If that means I lose you, then that's a choice you'll have to live with. But I've lived with too many regrets already, and I won't add this to the list." The room was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. I picked up my purse from the chair where I'd left it, and I looked at Louisa. "Let's go." She stood immediately, her face wet with tears. Daniel followed. We walked toward the door, and I could feel every eye on me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst, but I kept my head high. As I reached the door, Gerald spoke. "Eleanor." I stopped but didn't turn around. "You're right," he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I was out of line. I turned slowly to face him. He was still seated, but his expression had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. "I've built my whole life on the belief that success is the only thing that matters," he said. "And maybe that's made me forget that there are other kinds of strength, other kinds of value." He looked at Jeffrey, then back at me. "You're a hell of a woman, Eleanor. Your son is lucky to have you." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't expected that. Amanda was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. Jeffrey stood frozen, his face pale, his hands shaking. "Thank you," I said to Gerald. Then I looked at Jeffrey one last time. "I hope one day you'll understand." And I walked out. Louisa drove me home in silence. I stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur past, and I felt empty. Relieved, maybe, but mostly empty. "You were incredible," Louisa said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't feel incredible," I admitted. "I feel like I just lost my son." "You didn't lose him," she said. "He lost himself. But maybe this will wake him up." I didn't know if I believed that, but I wanted to. The days after that dinner were the longest of my life. I kept expecting Jeffrey to call. I kept checking my phone, hoping to see his name light up the screen, hoping he'd apologize, hoping he'd tell me he understood. But the phone stayed silent. Louisa called me every day, sometimes twice a day, just to check in. She told me I'd done the right thing, that I'd stood up for myself in a way that mattered. But knowing you did the right thing doesn't make it hurt less. I threw myself into work. I stayed late at the office, reorganizing files that didn't need reorganizing, helping people who didn't need help, anything to keep my mind off the silence. At night, I sat in my house, the same house where I'd raised my kids, the same house that now felt too big and too empty, and I let myself cry. People say that cutting off a toxic person is supposed to feel empowering. And maybe it does, eventually. But in the beginning, it just feels like grief. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. I started to accept that maybe this was it. Maybe Jeffrey had made his choice, and I was going to have to learn to live without him. Then, one Thursday evening, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Jeffrey standing on my porch. He looked terrible, his eyes were red and swollen, his hair was a mess, and he was wearing sweatpants and an old t-shirt, nothing like the polished businessman I'd seen at his house. For a moment, we just stared at each other. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I stepped aside and let him in. He sat down on my couch, and I sat in the chair across from him, keeping some distance between us. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Finally, Jeffrey said, "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. I just waited. "I've been replaying that night over and over in my head," he continued, his voice breaking. "And I keep seeing your face when I told you to apologize. I keep hearing myself say, God, I keep hearing myself say you'd stop being my mother." He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. "How could I have said that to you?" "I don't know, Jeffrey," I said quietly. "You tell me." He put his head in his hands. "I got so caught up in everything, the business, the money, trying to impress Gerald and Amanda and everyone else, that I forgot what actually mattered. I forgot who raised me. I forgot who you are." "You didn't forget," I said. "You chose to ignore it." He flinched, but he didn't argue. "You're right. I did. And I don't know if I can ever make that right, but I want to try. I want to be your son again, Mom. If you'll let me." I felt my own tears building, but I held them back. "Jeffrey, I never stopped loving you. But love isn't enough if you don't respect me. If you don't see my worth. If you're going to prioritize someone else's ego over my dignity, then we can't have a relationship. I won't go through that again." "I know," he said. "And I don't want you to. I ended the partnership with Gerald." I blinked. "What?" "I ended it," he repeated. "I told him I couldn't work with him anymore, not after what he said to you, and not after what I let him turn me into. Amanda and we've been talking a lot. She didn't agree with what I did that night either. She's been pushing me to come here, to apologize, to fix this. She said she didn't marry a man who abandons his mother. I sat back, processing this. You ended the partnership. Yeah. It's going to be hard, starting over without his money and his connections. But I'd rather struggle and be the man you raised than succeed and lose myself. For the first time in weeks, I felt something crack open inside me, something warm and cautiously. I'm proud of you, I said softly. That took guts. I learned it from you, he said, smiling through his tears. We sat there for a while, letting the weight of everything settle. Then Jeffrey stood up and crossed the room, and I stood too, and we hugged, really hugged, for the first time in what felt like years. I missed you, he whispered. I missed you too, I said. And for the first time since that terrible dinner, I believed that maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. But here's the thing about reconciliation, it's messy. It's not a fairy tale ending where everything goes back to normal. It takes time. It takes work. And it requires both people to show up and do the hard, uncomfortable work of rebuilding trust. So if you're going through something similar, if you're waiting for someone to come back to you, or if you're the one who needs to apologize, let me tell you, it's worth it. But only if both people are willing to change. And if you've stuck with me this far, then you already know this story isn't just about me. It's about every woman who's ever been told to sit down and be quiet, every mother who's been taken for granted, every person who's had to choose between their dignity and their relationships. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Check the description box for more stories like this one. Because we're not done yet. Jeffrey and I didn't fix everything overnight. Reconciliation is a slow process, full of awkward conversations, tentative boundaries, and moments where old wounds resurface unexpectedly. But we were both committed to trying, and that made all the difference. He started coming over for dinner once a week, just the two of us at first. We'd sit at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with homework and fed him when we had nothing but rice and beans, and we'd talk. Really talk. About his childhood, about the years after Harold died, about how he'd felt growing up without a father, about the pressure he'd felt to succeed. I always felt like I had to prove something, he admitted one evening, pushing his mashed potatoes around his plate. Like I had to be more, achieve more, because Dad wasn't there to be proud of me. He was proud of you, I said. He just didn't know how to show it. And Jeffrey, I've always been proud of you. I needed you to be proud of me too. I am, he said, his voice thick. I always was. I just let Gerald and his world make me feel like what you did wasn't enough, and that was wrong. It was so wrong, Mom. We cried together that night, the kind of crying that comes from deep places you didn't know still hurt. The kind that releases years of unspoken pain and misunderstanding. I held my son's hand across that old wooden table, and I felt like I was meeting him again for the first time, not as the boy I'd raised, but as the man he was becoming. A man who was learning, finally, that strength isn't about dominance or wealth or impressing people who don't matter. Strength is about admitting when you're wrong and doing the hard work to make it right. Amanda started coming to our dinners too, about a month in. I was nervous at first, unsure if she blamed me for the collapse of Jeffrey's partnership with her father. But the first thing she did when she walked through my door was hug me, tight and long, and whisper, "Thank you for not giving up on him." I could never give up on him, I said. He's my son. I know, she said, pulling back to look at me. And I'm sorry I didn't see what my father was doing to both of you. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. Over dinner that night, Amanda told me about her own struggles with Gerald. How he'd controlled every aspect of her life growing up. What schools she attended, what activities she participated in, even who she dated. How she'd rebelled in small ways, but never big enough to truly break free. How marrying Jeffrey had felt like freedom, but then Gerald had inserted himself into their marriage, into Jeffrey's business, into every decision they made. I watched him do to Jeffrey what he did to me, she said, her voice quiet and pained. I watched him make Jeffrey feel like he wasn't enough unless he had Dad's approval. And I didn't stop it because part of me was relieved that the pressure wasn't on me anymore. That's honest, I said. And honesty is where healing starts. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I told Dad we needed space. That he couldn't just show up at our house unannounced anymore, couldn't make decisions about our lives without asking us first. He didn't take it well at first. But then Mom talked to him, and I think your words that night, what you said at the dinner, they stuck with him. He's been different since then. Quieter. More thoughtful, maybe. I didn't know what to say to that. I hadn't set out to change Gerald Crowley. I'd only set out to protect my own dignity. But maybe that's how change happens sometimes. One person standing up forces everyone else to examine themselves. Jeffrey's new business was struggling, just as he'd predicted. Without Gerald's capital and connections, he had to start from scratch, taking on smaller clients, working longer hours, rebuilding his reputation on his own merit. I watched him come to my house exhausted, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes tired, and I saw more of the boy I'd raised than I had in years. He was humble again, hungry again, and he was happy in a way he hadn't been when everything was handed to him. "You know what's funny?" he said one night, leaning back in his chair after finishing his second helping of pot roast. "When I had Gerald's money backing me, every success felt empty, like it wasn't really mine. But last week, I landed a mid-sized client all on my own. No connections, no favors, just my pitch and my work. And Mom, I felt like I could fly." "That's because it was yours," I said. "You earned it." "I forgot what that felt like," he admitted. "I forgot what you taught me about working for what you have." "Well," I said, smiling, "consider it a refresher course." Louisa was thrilled to have her brother back. The four of us, me, Louisa, Jeffrey, and Amanda, started having regular family dinners, rotating between houses. Louisa's kids, my grandchildren, adored their Uncle Jeff, and watching him play with them, seeing him get down on the floor and build Lego towers and push them on swings, I saw glimpses of the father he'd become someday. The father I'd raised him to be. But healing isn't linear. There were hard days. Days when old patterns resurfaced, when Jeffrey would say something that revealed he still had work to do, still had Gerald's voice echoing in his head. Days when I'd feel the old hurt bubble up, when I'd remember standing in his driveway hearing him tell me I'd stop being his mother, and I'd have to excuse myself to cry in private. One particularly difficult evening, about 4 months after our reconciliation, we had an argument. Jeffrey and Amanda had made a big purchase, a new car, expensive, flashy, and when he mentioned it casually over dinner, something in me snapped. "Can you afford that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "We're managing," he said. "Jeffrey, you just told me last week that you were worried about making payroll." His face tightened. "Mom, we're fine." "Are you?" I pressed. "Or are you trying to keep up appearances? Trying to look successful before you actually are?" "That's not fair," he said, his voice rising. "You don't know what our finances look like." "I know what living beyond your means looks like," I said. "I watched your father do it. I watched him buy things we couldn't afford because he wanted to feel like more than he was, and when he died, I was the one who had to figure out how to pay for it all." Jeffrey stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not Dad." "Then stop acting like him." I shot back. The room went silent. Amanda looked between us, uncertain. Louisa, who'd been there that night, cleared her throat. "Maybe we should all take a breath," she suggested gently. But Jeffrey was already grabbing his jacket. "I think we should go." "Jeffrey," Amanda started. "No, it's fine," he said, his voice tight. "Let's go." They left, and I sat at my table feeling like I'd just undone months of progress. Louisa stayed, helping me clean up in silence. Finally, she said, "You weren't wrong, Mom." "I was harsh," I said. "You were honest," she corrected. And he needed to hear it. But he's still figuring out how to separate his ego from his decisions. Give him time to process. I nodded, but I spent that night unable to sleep, staring at my ceiling, wondering if I'd pushed too hard, if I'd driven him away again. But the next morning, Jeffrey called. "You were right," he said, no preamble. "The car was stupid. We can't afford it, not really. I was trying to prove something, to myself, to Gerald, I don't know. Amanda and I talked about it all night, and we're taking it back today." I felt relief wash over me. "Jeffrey, I'm sorry I snapped at you." "Don't be," he said. "You were being a mom. That's what you do. You tell me the truth even when I don't want to hear it. I need that. I need you to keep me honest." "Okay," I said softly. "I can do that." "I know you can," he said. "That's why you're the strongest person I know." We hung up, and I sat there in my kitchen with tears running down my face, but this time they were good tears. Grateful tears. Because my son was finding his way back to himself, and I was getting to witness it. The holidays came, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely excited about them. Jeffrey and Amanda hosted Thanksgiving at their house, and Gerald and Diane were invited too. I was nervous about seeing Gerald again, but when he arrived, he sought me out immediately. "Eleanor," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." I shook his hand. "Thank you for having me." He hesitated, then said, "I've thought a lot about what you said that night. And I want you to know, I'm working on being better. Being less of an ass, as my wife puts it." I laughed despite myself. "That's a good goal." "Diane's been helping me see things differently," he continued. "Reminding me that the things I'm most proud of in life aren't the deals I've closed or the money I've made. They're the people I've raised and the relationships I've built. Or failed to build, in some cases." "It's never too late," I said. "Trust me. I've learned that the hard way." He nodded, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that I'd never seen before. "I'm glad Jeffrey has you. I'm glad Amanda has you. And I'm glad I got a chance to really see you. You're remarkable, Eleanor." "So are you, Gerald," I said. "When you let yourself be." Dinner that night was warm and loud and full of laughter. I sat at the table surrounded by my children, my grandchildren, and even Gerald and Diane, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, complete. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't, but because everyone there was trying. Trying to be better, to love better, to show up for each other. After dinner, Jeffrey stood up to make a toast. He was holding a glass of wine, and his hand was shaking slightly. "I want to say something," he began, and the room quieted. "A few months ago, I made the worst mistake of my life. I told my mother that if she didn't apologize for standing up for herself, she'd stop being my mother. And she called my bluff. She walked away because she knew her worth, even when I didn't." He looked at me, his eyes glistening. "Mom, you saved me that night. You saved me from becoming someone I would have hated. Someone who valued money over integrity, status over love, pride over family. You showed me what real strength looks like, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be half as strong as you." I was crying openly now, and I didn't care who saw. "So this toast is for you," Jeffrey said, raising his glass. "For teaching me that it's never too late to choose better. For refusing to shrink so other people could feel big. For being the kind of mother every son should be lucky enough to have. I love you, Mom. And I'm sorry it took me so long to show it the way you deserved." Everyone raised their glasses, and I saw tears on more faces than just mine. Amanda was crying. Louisa was crying. Even Gerald looked misty-eyed. "To Eleanor," they all said in unison. And in that moment, I realized something profound. For so many years, I'd believed that my worth came from what I could do for others, how much I could sacrifice, how much I could give, how small I could make myself to accommodate everyone else's needs. But I'd been wrong. My worth came from who I was. From my resilience, my honesty, my refusal to accept less than I deserved. And by standing up for myself that night at Jeffrey's house, I hadn't just saved my own dignity. I taught everyone in that room a lesson they desperately needed to learn. That women like me don't bow to arrogance. We bend for love, we sacrifice for family, we work ourselves to the bone for the people we care about. But we don't shrink. We don't apologize for taking up space. And we don't let anyone, not our sons, not our in-laws, not anyone, tell us we're less than because we didn't have their advantages. The rest of the evening passed in a warm blur. I held my grandchildren, laughed with my daughter, talked with Amanda about her hopes for the future, and even had a surprisingly deep conversation with Gerald about his own childhood, his own father, and the ways we all carry our parents' mistakes until we decide to put them down. When I finally went home that night, Louisa drove me, and we sat in my driveway for a while before I got out of the car. "You changed all of them, you know," Louisa said softly. "I didn't try to change anyone," I said. "I just stopped pretending I was less than I am." "That's how you changed them," she said, smiling. "You showed them what authentic strength looks like. And now they can't unsee it." I hugged my daughter tight, breathing in her familiar smell, lavender shampoo and the faint scent of the hospital where she worked. "Thank you for always believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." "That's what daughters do," she said. "We see our mothers clearly, even when they can't see themselves." I went inside, made myself a cup of tea, and sat in my living room in the quiet darkness, feeling more at peace than I had in years. My life wasn't perfect. I was still working at the county clerk's office, still living in my modest house, still driving my 15-year-old car. But I'd reclaimed something more valuable than money or status. I'd reclaimed myself. And if you're someone who's lost yourself in trying to please others, in making yourself small, in sacrificing your dignity for the sake of keeping peace, let me tell you something, it's not too late. It's never too late to stand up, to speak your truth, to demand the respect you deserve. Will it cost you? Maybe. Will it be hard? Absolutely. But the alternative, living a life where you're invisible, where you're taken for granted, where you're constantly apologizing for existing, that costs more. So if this story has meant something to you, if you've seen yourself in these words, do me a favor. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Comment where you're watching from, because I want to know that I'm not alone in this. And check the description box for more stories like this one. Stories about women who found their voices, who refused to be silenced, who chose themselves even when it was terrifying. Because this isn't just my story. It's ours. All of us who've been told we're too much or not enough, who've been expected to shrink and smile and never complain. This is for us. The months that followed that Thanksgiving felt like watching a garden grow after a long, brutal winter. Slow at first, tentative, with false starts and unexpected setbacks. But growth nonetheless. Jeffrey's business continued to struggle, but he was handling it differently now. Instead of pretending everything was fine, instead of making desperate moves to appear successful, he was honest about the challenges. He downsized his office, let go of unnecessary expenses, and focused on building genuine relationships with clients rather than trying to impress them with flash and presentation. And slowly, incrementally, it started working. I had a guy tell me yesterday that he hired me because I was real with him, Jeffrey told me over one of our Wednesday dinners. He said he'd met with 3 other consultants who all promised him the moon, but I was the only one who told him the truth about what he actually needed and what I could realistically deliver. And that honesty closed the deal. Imagine that, I said, smiling. Honesty working out. He laughed. You don't have to sound so smug about it. I'm not smug, I said. I'm proud. There's a difference. Amanda got a promotion at work, which helped ease the financial pressure. But more than that, I watched her come into her own in a way she hadn't before. She started speaking up more, offering her opinions without hedging or apologizing. She cut her hair short, a dramatic change that Gerald apparently hated, which made her love it even more. I spent my whole life trying to be what he wanted, she told me one afternoon when she stopped by unannounced. We were sitting on my porch, drinking sweet tea and watching the neighborhood kids play in the street. The perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect everything. And I was exhausted. Watching you stand up to him that night, watching you refuse to shrink yourself, it made me realize I didn't have to either. How's he handling it? I asked. Your newfound independence. She smiled. His adjusting. Mom's been a big help. She told him the other day that he needed to decide whether he wanted relationships with his family or whether he wanted to be right all the time, because he couldn't have both. I almost fell out of my chair. Good for Diane, I said. Sometimes the quietest people have the loudest truths waiting to come out. She's been different too, Amanda said. More assertive. She joined a book club, started taking art classes, things Dad used to dismiss as silly. But she's happier. I can see it in her face. It seemed that night, that awful, transformative night, had sent ripples through everyone it touched. We'd all been forced to examine ourselves, to confront the ways we'd been complicit in our own diminishment or in diminishing others. And we were all doing the hard work of becoming better. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were arguments, misunderstandings, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. One particularly difficult incident happened about 7 months after the reconciliation. Jeffrey and Amanda announced they were pregnant. I was overjoyed, of course. My first grandchild from Jeffrey, a new life, a new beginning. But at the baby shower Amanda's friends threw for her, Gerald made a comment that sent me right back to that dining room table. We were all gathered in Amanda's living room, friends from work, family, neighbors. Gerald was holding court, as usual, telling everyone about the nursery he was planning to build, the trust fund he was setting up, all the ways he was going to provide for his grandchild. This baby's going to want for nothing, he announced proudly. Best schools, best opportunities, everything money can buy. Children need love more than money, I said quietly, not really intending for everyone to hear. But Gerald heard. He turned to me, and for a moment, I saw the old Gerald, the one who couldn't stand being contradicted, especially by a woman he'd once dismissed. Of course they need love, Eleanor, he said, his tone patronizing. But love doesn't pay for college. Love doesn't open doors. No, I agreed. But love teaches them who they are. Money without love just creates entitled adults who don't know the value of anything. The room had gone quiet. Amanda looked between us, her face tense. Jeffrey stood up from where he'd been sitting across the room. Actually, Gerald, Jeffrey said, his voice calm but firm, Mom's right. I had love growing up, and I didn't have much money, and I turned out fine. Better than fine. The things she taught me about work, about integrity, about resilience, those are the things that matter. Those are the things I want to teach my kid. Gerald's face reddened. I could see him struggling, the old pride warring with the new self-awareness he'd been cultivating. Finally, he said, "You're right. Both of you. I want this child to have everything. Including what you had, Jeffrey, a mother like Eleanor." It wasn't a full apology, but it was acknowledgement. Progress. And sometimes, that's all you can ask for. The baby came in early spring, a boy they named Henry, after Harold. When Jeffrey told me the name, I cried for an hour straight. It felt like a gift, an honoring not just of Harold but of everything we'd survived, everything we'd built from the ashes of his death. I held Henry in the hospital, this tiny, perfect creature, and I made him a silent promise. I promised that I would teach him what I'd learned the hard way, that kindness matters more than success, that integrity matters more than wealth, that standing up for yourself and for others is the highest form of strength. I promised that I would never let him feel like he had to choose between love and honesty, between family and dignity. Jeffrey and Amanda were good parents, attentive and loving. But they were also exhausted, overwhelmed, terrified they were doing everything wrong. So I helped. Not by taking over, not by insisting I knew best, but by showing up. I came over twice a week to hold Henry while Amanda napped. I made meals and froze them so they'd have something easy on the hard days. I listened when they needed to vent, offered advice only when asked, and reminded them constantly that they were doing better than they thought. How did you do this alone? Amanda asked me one afternoon. Henry was asleep in her arms, and she looked exhausted, her hair unwashed, her eyes shadowed. How did you survive this with 2 kids and no partner? I don't know, I admitted. I just did what had to be done. And I cried a lot when they were asleep. I cry almost every day, she confessed. That's normal, I assured her. It means you care. It means you're human. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Gerald came to visit frequently, and I watched him soften in ways I never expected. He was gentle with Henry, patient in a way I'd never seen him be with anyone. One afternoon, I arrived to find him sitting in the nursery, rocking Henry and singing, actually singing, a lullaby I didn't recognize. My mother used to sing that to me, he said when he noticed me in the doorway. He looked almost embarrassed. I'd forgotten until just now. It's beautiful, I said. I wasn't a good father, he said suddenly, his voice rough. I provided for Amanda, but I didn't. I didn't know how to just be with her, you know? I didn't know how to be soft. My father wasn't soft with me, and I thought that was just how men were supposed to be. It's not too late, I said. You can be soft with Henry. You can show him a different way. He nodded, tears running down his weathered cheeks. I want to. God, I want to. Watching Gerald hold his grandson, watching him break down the walls he'd spent a lifetime building, I felt something unexpected, compassion. Even for him. Even after everything. Because I realized that hurt people, and healed people heal people, and we're all just trying to figure out how to do better than what was done to us. My relationship with Jeffrey deepened in ways I'd never imagined possible. We didn't just have surface-level conversations anymore. We talked about everything, his fears about fatherhood, his regrets about the years we'd lost, his hopes for who he wanted to become. And he asked me questions about my life, questions no one had ever asked before. Were you happy with Dad? He asked me one evening. We were sitting on my porch, watching the sunset, Henry asleep in a carrier on Jeffrey's chest. I considered the question carefully. I was content. Your father was a good man, but we didn't have the kind of marriage where we talked about our feelings or our dreams. We existed side by side, and that was enough for that time in my life. But if I'm being honest, I wish I'd had more. I wish I'd had partnership, real partnership, the kind where both people see each other fully. Do you ever regret not remarrying? Sometimes, I admitted. But I also valued my independence. After spending my childhood in my father's house and my marriage in your father's shadow, there was something powerful about building a life that was entirely mine. No one to answer to, no one to shrink myself for. That was worth something too. You're incredible, Mom, he said softly. I hope I can be half the parent you were. You already are, I said. Because you're present. You're trying. That's all kids really need, parents who show up and keep trying even when they get it wrong. Louisa's kids were getting older, and I watched them navigate middle school and high school with all the drama and heartbreak that entails. My granddaughter, Emma, came to me one day in tears because a boy had broken up with her. I feel so stupid for caring, she sobbed into my shoulder. He wasn't even that nice to me. You're not stupid, I said firmly. You're learning. You're learning what you deserve and what you don't. And that boy, he just taught you that you deserve someone who's kind to you, who sees your worth. That's not a small lesson, sweetheart. How do you always know what to say? She asked. I don't, I admitted. I just tell you what I wish someone had told me when I was your age. That your heart matters. That your feelings are valid. That you don't have to make yourself smaller to make someone else comfortable. She hugged me tighter. I love you, Grandma. I love you too, baby. Those moments, holding my grandchildren, guiding them, watching them grow, gave my life a richness I'd never experienced before. I'd spent so many years just surviving, just pushing through, that I'd forgotten to notice the beauty in the small things. But now, in my 70s, I was finally learning to be present, to savor, to rest. I retired from the county clerk's office at 72. It was bittersweet. I'd spent almost 35 years there, and it had given me purpose and identity when I desperately needed both. But my body was tired, and I wanted to spend my remaining years focusing on family, on the relationships I'd fought so hard to preserve and repair. My co-workers threw me a retirement party, and I was stunned by how many people came. People whose documents I'd filed, whose problems I'd solved, whose hands I'd held when they were overwhelmed by bureaucracy. They told stories about how I'd helped them, how I'd treated them with dignity when other offices had made them feel small. And I realized that my work had mattered, even if it hadn't been glamorous or lucrative. I'd spent decades seeing people, really seeing them, and that had left a mark. Jeffrey gave a speech at my retirement party. He talked about watching me work 3 jobs when he was a kid, about how I'd shown him that honest work had value regardless of the paycheck, about how my example had shaped him more than he'd realized. My mother taught me that how you treat people matters more than how much money you make, he said. That showing up matters more than showing off. That integrity is the only legacy worth leaving. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to pass those lessons on to my son, because they're the most valuable things I own. I ugly cried through the entire speech, and I didn't care who saw. In the year following my retirement, I discovered something unexpected. I liked my life. Not in a resigned, this is fine way, but in a genuine, deep in my bones contentment that I'd never experienced before. I spent my days reading the books I'd never had time for, tending to a garden I'd planted in my backyard, volunteering at the local library's literacy program. I babysat Henry twice a week, which became the highlight of my week. I had lunch with Louisa every Thursday. I took a watercolor painting class at the community center and discovered I was terrible at it but didn't care because it was fun. I'd spent so much of my life in survival mode, in service mode, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to simply exist without a crisis to manage or a problem to solve. And it was glorious. But peace doesn't mean the absence of challenge. It just means you're better equipped to handle it when it comes. Henry was about 18 months old when Jeffrey and Amanda started having marital problems. Nothing catastrophic, just the slow erosion that happens when 2 people are exhausted and overwhelmed and forget to prioritize each other. They snapped at each other over small things. They stopped laughing together. They existed as co-parents but not as partners. Amanda came to me first, sitting at my kitchen table while Henry napped in my spare bedroom. I don't know if we're going to make it, she said, her voice flat with exhaustion. We're just so tired and disconnected. And I look at him sometimes and wonder if we made a mistake. Do you love him? I asked. Yes. But I don't like him very much right now. I nodded, understanding. Marriage is long, Amanda. There are going to be seasons where you don't like each other. Where you're just getting through. The question is whether you're both willing to do the work to find your way back to each other. What if we can't? Then you can't, I said honestly. But don't make that decision from a place of exhaustion. Make it from a place of clarity. Go to counseling. Take a weekend away, just the two of you. Remember who you were before you were parents. And then decide. She took my advice. They went to couples counseling, which Jeffrey resisted at first but eventually embraced. They took a weekend trip to a cabin in the mountains, leaving Henry with me. And slowly, carefully, they started to rebuild. The counselor made us do this exercise, Jeffrey told me later. We had to tell each other one thing we appreciated about the other person every day. It sounds so simple, so cheesy. But Mom, it worked. We'd gotten so focused on everything that was going wrong that we'd stopped noticing anything that was right. And there was so much right. I'm glad, I said. Marriage is work, sweetheart. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. But it's good work when you're with the right person. How do you know if they're the right person? He asked. You know because you choose them over and over, even on the days when you don't want to, I said. Love isn't a feeling that sweeps you away and solves all your problems. It's a choice you make every single day. Your father and I, we weren't perfect, but we chose each other. Even on the hard days. Even when it would have been easier to walk away. Jeffrey nodded, processing. I'm choosing Amanda, he said finally. Every day, I'm choosing her. Then you're going to be fine, I assured him. And they were. Not overnight, and not without setbacks. But they did the work, both of them, and their marriage came through stronger for it. Gerald's health started declining around this time. He had a minor stroke, not debilitating but serious enough to be a wake-up call. I went to visit him in the hospital with Jeffrey and Amanda. He looked smaller in that hospital bed, more fragile than I'd ever seen him. The silver-haired titan who'd once dominated every room he entered was suddenly just an aging man confronting his mortality. Eleanor, he said when he saw me. You came. Of course I came, I said, sitting in the chair beside his bed. We're family now, aren't we? He smiled weakly. I suppose we are. Funny how that happened. Not funny, I said. Intentional. We chose to be family, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. He was quiet for a moment, then said, I've been thinking a lot lately about legacy. About what I'm leaving behind. And I realized that all the money, all the business success, none of it matters if I leave behind people who resented me, who felt crushed by me. I don't want that. I want to leave behind people who knew they were loved. Then tell them, I said simply. Tell Amanda. Tell Diane. Tell Gerald Jr., his son from his first marriage, whom I'd met a few times. Tell them now, while you still can. He did. Over the following weeks, as he recovered, Gerald started having conversations with his family that he'd avoided for decades. He apologized to Amanda for the way he'd controlled her life. He apologized to Diane for taking her for granted. He even apologized to me again, more fully this time, for his behavior that night at dinner and for all the subtle ways he'd tried to make me feel inferior. You were right, he said. I was arrogant. I used my money and my success as a weapon to make other people feel small. And I'm ashamed of that. I'm ashamed of the man I was. Then be a different man now, I said. It's not too late. He squeezed my hand. Thank you for not giving up on us. On any of us. We're all just trying to do better, I said. That's all any of us can do. Gerald lived for another 3 years after that stroke. In those years, I watched him transform from the man who'd belittled me at his table to someone gentler, more present, more human. He played with Henry for hours, getting down on the floor despite his bad knees. He told stories about his own childhood, about his fears and regrets. He became, finally, the father and grandfather his family had always needed him to be. When he died, peacefully, in his sleep, at 78, the funeral was packed. But the eulogies weren't about his business acumen or his wealth. They were about his laugh, his love for his family, the way he'd changed in his final years. About the man he'd become after he'd stopped trying to prove he was better than everyone else. I sat next to Diane at the funeral, holding her hand while she cried. He loved you, you know, she said to me at the reception afterward. He told me once that you saved him. That your refusal to back down, to shrink yourself, woke him up. He said if you hadn't stood up to him that night, he would have died without ever realizing what he'd become. I cried then, for Gerald, for the complicated, flawed, beautiful messiness of human transformation. For the fact that it's never too late to change, never too late to become better. Henry grew into a bright, curious child. He was 4 now, asking endless questions about everything, wanting to know how things worked and why people did what they did. I took him to the park every Tuesday, and we'd sit on a bench and watch the other children play, and he'd narrate everything he saw with the earnest seriousness only a 4-year-old can muster. "Grandma, why is that boy being mean?" he asked one day, pointing to a child who'd pushed another kid off the swing. "Sometimes people are mean because they're hurting inside," I said. "Or because they don't know any better yet. That's why it's important to be kind, even when other people aren't." "Were you always kind, Grandma?" he asked, looking up at me with his father's eyes. I thought about that question. About my father's fists, my mother's silence, the years I'd spent making myself small. About the night I'd stood up to Gerald, the words I'd spoken that had changed everything. "No, sweetheart," I said honestly. "I wasn't always kind. Sometimes I was silent when I should have spoken up. Sometimes I let people treat me badly because I didn't think I deserved better. But I learned. And I'm still learning. And that's what matters, that we keep trying to be better." "I want to be kind like you," Henry said, snuggling into my side. "Then you will be," I promised, kissing the top of his head. "Because you have a good heart, just like your." Louisa's children were in college now, and watching them navigate that world brought back memories of my own sacrifices to get their uncle and mother through school. But Emma and her brother Marcus, yes, I know I said no Marcus, but this is Louisa's son, and I'm taking creative liberty here with my own grandson, were different. They had opportunities I'd never dreamed of, but they also had something more important. They had the knowledge that they were loved unconditionally, that their worth wasn't tied to their achievements. Emma came to visit me one weekend during her sophomore year. She changed her major 3 times and was anxious about disappointing everyone. "I don't know what I want to do with my life, Grandma," she said, sprawled on my couch with the dramatic despair only a 20-year-old can achieve. "Everyone else seems so sure, and I'm just lost." "Being lost is part of finding your way," I said. "I didn't figure out who I was until I was in my 70s. You've got time." "Really? You just figured it out?" "Really," I confirmed. "I spent so many years being what other people needed, a daughter, a wife, a mother, a worker. It wasn't until recently that I started asking myself what I wanted. What made me happy. And you know what? I'm still figuring it out. But that's okay. Life isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking good questions and being brave enough to follow where they lead." She sat up, looking at me with new curiosity. "What makes you happy, Grandma?" "This," I said simply. "Sitting here with you. Watching you figure out who you are. Reading my books, painting my terrible watercolors, playing with Henry. Being present with the people I love. That's what makes me happy. And it took me 7 decades to realize that was enough." "That's beautiful," she said softly. "It's simple," I corrected. "But simple isn't the same as easy. It took a lot of hard choices to get here. A lot of standing up for myself when I wanted to give in. A lot of choosing my dignity over other people's comfort." "Like that night with Uncle Jeffrey and Great-Grandpa Gerald?" she asked. She'd heard the story, of course. It had become family legend. "Exactly like that," I said. "That night changed everything. Not because I was trying to change anyone else, but because I finally refused to change myself to make other people happy." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I want to be like that. Strong like you." "You already are," I assured her. "You're here, asking hard questions, admitting you're lost instead of pretending you have it all figured out. That takes more courage than people realize." She hugged me tight, and I felt the weight of generations in that embrace. My mother, who'd never learned to stand up for herself. Me, who'd learned too late but learned nonetheless. Louisa, who'd watched and internalized the lesson earlier. And now Emma, who had the gift of knowing from the beginning that her voice mattered, that she didn't have to shrink herself for anyone. That's what legacy really is, I realized. Not money or property or achievements. It's the lessons we pass down, the patterns we break, the freedom we give the next generation to be more fully themselves than we ever got to be. Jeffrey's business finally stabilized and then began to thrive, but in a different way than he'd originally envisioned. Instead of trying to be the biggest or the flashiest, he'd built a reputation for integrity and honest dealing. His clients were loyal because they trusted him. His employees stayed because he treated them well. He made enough money to be comfortable, to provide for his family, but he wasn't consumed by the pursuit of wealth anymore. "I'm happy, Mom," he told me one evening. We were sitting on his back porch, watching Amanda and Henry play in the yard. Really, genuinely happy. And I don't think I ever was before, even when I had Gerald's money backing me and everything looked perfect on paper. "That's because you're living in alignment with your values now," I said. "When what you do matches who you are, that's when you find peace." "When did you get so wise?" he asked, smiling. "When I finally got old enough to stop caring what other people thought," I said. "Age is good for something, at least." He laughed, then grew serious. "I'm sorry I wasted so much time. So many years when we could have had this relationship but didn't because I was too proud, too caught up in impressing the wrong people." "We can't get those years back," I said. "But we have these years. We have now. And I choose to focus on that." "Me too," he said. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for calling my bluff that night. If you hadn't." "But I did," I interrupted gently. "And you came back. And we both did the work. That's what matters." Amanda joined us on the porch, settling into the chair beside Jeffrey with a tired sigh. "That child has more energy than should be legally allowed," she said, but she was smiling. "He gets it from his grandmother," Jeffrey said, grinning at me. "Please," I scoffed. "I'm 75 years old. My energy comes in short bursts followed by long naps." "But when you have energy, you could power a small city," Amanda said. "I watched you chase Henry around the park last week. I was exhausted just observing." We sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies begin to emerge as dusk settled over the yard. Henry ran over, demanding that Daddy catch the light bugs for him, and Jeffrey gamely got up to oblige. I watched my son play with his son, and I felt a fullness in my chest that was almost painful. This was what I'd fought for. This moment. This peace. This family that had broken and healed and learned to love each other better. Diane came to visit me regularly after Gerald died. We'd developed an unlikely friendship, bonded by our shared experience of loving and being frustrated by the same man. She was discovering herself too, taking up painting seriously now, traveling to places Gerald had never wanted to go. "I'm 69 years old, and I'm finally living my life," she told me over coffee one afternoon. Gerald's death was devastating, but it was also freeing. "Is that terrible to say?" "It's honest," I said. "And honesty isn't terrible. We can love people and also acknowledge that their presence in our lives limited us in certain ways. Both things can be true." "I wish I'd found my voice sooner," she said wistfully. "Like you did. I spent 50 years being quiet." "But you found it," I said. "That's what matters. And now you get to use it." She smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face. "I'm using it. Last week I told my sister exactly what I thought about her passive-aggressive comments about my weight. I've been wanting to say something for 30 years. How did it feel?" I asked. "Terrifying," she admitted. "But also incredible. Like I'd been holding my breath my whole life and finally exhaled." "That's it exactly," I said. "That's what happens when you stop shrinking yourself." I started writing my story that year. Not for publication or fame, just for my grandchildren and their children, so they'd know where they came from. So they'd know that their great-grandmother wasn't always strong, wasn't always brave, but she learned to be. So they'd know that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to choose your dignity, to refuse to bow to arrogance. I wrote about my childhood in that shotgun house, about my father's violence and my mother's silence. I wrote about Harold, about the loneliness of our marriage and the devastation of his death. I wrote about the years of working multiple jobs, of sacrificing everything for my children. And I wrote about that night at Jeffrey's house, about the choice I'd made to walk away rather than apologize for existing, for having opinions, for refusing to be diminished. Louisa helped me edit it. We sat together at my kitchen table, reading through pages and pages of my life, and she cried more than I did. "Mom, this is beautiful," she said, wiping her eyes. "This is important. Other women need to hear this. It's just my story, I said. Exactly, she said. And your story is every woman's story. Every woman who's been told to be quiet, to be smaller, to apologize for taking up space. They need to know they're not alone. They need to know it's possible to change, to choose yourself, even when it costs you. So I let her convince me to share it more widely. She helped me create a blog, and then, eventually, this video you're watching now. And the response has been overwhelming. Women from all over the world reaching out to tell me their stories, to thank me for putting words to what they felt, to tell me that my story gave them the courage to stand up for themselves. There was a woman from Kenya who wrote to tell me she'd left her abusive husband after watching my story. A woman from Texas who'd confronted her boss about years of dismissive treatment. A grandmother in Japan who'd reconciled with her estranged daughter after they both watched the video and realized they'd been letting pride and hurt keep them apart. You started a movement, Mom, Jeffrey said, half joking but half serious, after my story went viral. I didn't start anything, I protested. I just told the truth. That's how movements start, he said. One person telling the truth, and then everyone else realizing they don't have to lie anymore. On my 76th birthday, my family threw me a party. Not a big, fancy affair. Just the people I loved most gathered in Jeffrey and Amanda's backyard. My children, my grandchildren, Diane, a few close friends from my years at the clerk's office. We ate too much food, laughed at old stories, and watched Henry blow out the candles on my cake with more enthusiasm than accuracy. As the evening wound down and guests started leaving, Jeffrey stood up and clinked his glass for attention. I want to say something, he announced. Mom, 76 years ago, you came into this world. And over the course of those 7.5 decades, you've touched more lives than you probably realize. You raised 2 kids on your own after Dad died. You worked your fingers to the bone to give us opportunities you never had. You treated thousands of people with dignity and respect during your years at the clerk's office. You stood up for yourself when it would have been easier to stay silent. And you taught all of us, me, Amanda, Louisa, your grandchildren, everyone who's heard your story, what real strength looks like. He paused, his voice catching. But more than all of that, you taught us that it's never too late. Never too late to change, to grow, to choose better. You were in your 70s when you finally put yourself first, when you finally refused to shrink yourself for anyone. And if you can do it at 70, then none of us have any excuse. None of us get to say it's too late, we're too old, we're too set in our ways. Because you proved that's not true. He raised his glass. So here's to Eleanor Pritchard. The strongest person I know. The best mother anyone could ask for. And living proof that women who know their worth don't bow to anyone's arrogance. Happy birthday, Mom. I love you more than words can say. Everyone raised their glasses, and I sat there crying happy tears, surrounded by the family I'd fought so hard to keep and repair. Henry climbed into my lap and patted my wet cheeks with his small hands. Don't be sad, Grandma, he said earnestly. I'm not sad, baby, I said, hugging him close. I'm happy. So happy. And I was. Despite everything, the pain, the losses, the years of struggle, I was happy. Because I'd learned the most important lesson of all, that my worth wasn't determined by how much I sacrificed, how small I made myself, or how much I endured in silence. My worth was inherent. It was mine simply because I existed. And once I understood that, everything else fell into place. As I sit here now, recording this story for all of you, I'm 77 years old. My body aches in ways it didn't when I was younger. I move slower, tire faster. But my spirit is lighter than it's ever been. Because I'm finally, fully, unapologetically myself. I don't know how many years I have left. None of us do. But I know this, I will spend every remaining day living in alignment with my truth. I will speak up when something's wrong. I will stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. I will love my family fiercely and honestly. And I will never, ever apologize for existing, for having opinions, for taking up space. Because that night in Jeffrey's driveway, when he told me I had to choose between my dignity and my relationship with him, I made a choice that saved my life. Not in a dramatic, physical sense, but in a spiritual sense. I chose myself. And in choosing myself, I taught everyone around me that they could choose themselves too. That's the lesson I want to leave you with, wherever you are in the world, whatever struggles you're facing. You matter. Your voice matters. Your dignity matters. And you never, ever have to shrink yourself to make someone else comfortable. Not for your parents, not for your spouse, not for your children, not for anyone. Will it cost you? Maybe. Will it be hard? Absolutely. Will you lose people? Possibly. But you'll gain something infinitely more valuable. Yourself. Your authentic, powerful, unapologetic self. And that's worth everything. So if you're someone who's been making yourself small, someone who's been apologizing for existing, someone who's been told your confidence is threatening or your honesty is rude or your strength is unfeminine, I see you. I was you. And I'm here to tell you that you can change your story. It's never too late. Stand up. Speak up. Choose yourself. And watch what happens when you finally refuse to bow to anyone's arrogance. My name is Eleanor Pritchard. I'm 77 years old. I'm a mother, a grandmother, a retired county clerk, and a woman who learned to love herself after 7 decades of putting everyone else first. And this is my truth. Women like me don't bow. We bend for love. We sacrifice for family. We work ourselves to the bone for the people we care about. But we don't shrink. We don't apologize for being strong. And we don't let anyone, not our sons, not our in-laws, not anyone, tell us we're less than because we didn't have their advantages or their approval. We know our worth. And once you know your worth, nobody can take it away from you. Nobody. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here, for sharing this journey with me. If this story touched you, if it made you think or cry or feel less alone, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one, and your stories inspire me as much as I hope mine inspires you. And check the description box below. There are more stories there, stories about women who found their voices, who chose themselves, who refused to be silenced. Stories that might be exactly what you need to hear right now. Remember, it's never too late. You are never too old. You are never too stuck. You can always choose differently. You can always choose yourself. And when you do, everything changes. Thank you. God bless you. And may you always remember that your worth isn't up for debate. It simply is. Now go out there and live like you know it.